folks, welcome back to Indaba Conversation. This is Chris once again. Hello, folks, and welcome back once again to Chris Wide Africa. This is Chris in Central Pennsylvania on the Indaba Africa channel, part of the Indaba Broadcasting Network. A very special feature this morning. Really excited about this. I've got an American on the line today. Pretty cool. This is a bit different, though. We'll be talking China and Africa and a few other topics probably come up, but I have a journalist here. I don't get a lot of journalists on here. A lot of them are afraid to come on camera, but this guy's not. And also I'll have Gail McCabe on here from the American Forces Network, now an independent journalist who did that for 3 decades, covering events for the Department of Defense all over the world. And so she'll be on here shortly, probably next week. But anyway, today I'd like to introduce my guest, Eric Olander, who is an American, speaks Mandarin, one of the many languages spoken in China, but with the top one there, I believe, with numerically. But he's in China. He's been there for a long time. And we're going to get some insights about China and Africa. We've talked about that a lot on the program, and people are always asking about it, although not so much of late. So I thought it was time to bring the China and Africa topic back to the fore. So Eric, welcome to the program. It's a pleasure to have you on.
It's great to be on. I'm only returning the favor after you kindly joined us on our show a couple years ago. So it's great to finally be back on the show.
Well, in fact, what you're talking about is the China and Africa Project, which you're the managing editor of, and I believe the founder, if I'm not mistaken, the China and Africa Project. And 12
years now.
Oh, wow, it's been 12 years. And actually, I got to give you credit, Eric. While I was still serving in active duty and I came across the China Africa Project, I looked at that because I had to decide what I wanted to do when I grew up. What am I going to do after the Army? And lots of things to do. I decided to go in consulting, but I did want to get back into media because I'd done that in radio when I was younger. And I'm like, it's this YouTube, unless you're an OnlyFans person, doing soft porn, how you gonna make a living or do something from this? It doesn't work. And your China Africa Project really opened my eyes up to the possibilities that if you have a topic that's of interest to people and you do it professionally, you can actually draw an audience and do something positive. Now, in the interest of full disclosure here, you and I don't agree on some things. Politically, you're left of center, and I'm a bit right of center. So that's good. And
and I'm hoping we're going to have a spirited discussion today, because in these spirited discussions, we get some clarity on some issues. When we're only talking to people that we agree with, it's boring.
Well, it's an echo chamber.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's funny because, I actually, on my original channel, I used to tell people I'd love to have you on here, and I love a discourse. If you disagree with me, share it. And that was actually a mistake. It just invited trolls to come on. So we had to fight the trolls for a long time. But I do enjoy I do enjoy the spirited conversation. But let's talk a little bit about your background. You're a journalist. Yeah. I think you've worked for CNN and a number of other
CNN, AP, BBC, CNBC. You name the alphabet soup of networks, and I've done it. And I started back when I was a teenager in Taiwan. And so my background is in Asia. So I started studying Chinese when I was in high school back in '85 during the tail end of the Cold War. Back then, China was closed. It was poorer than most African countries are today. There was any hint that China in 1985, 1986 was going to become the China of 2022. It was inconceivable. People would have laughed at you if you said this is going to have the largest navy in the world. It's going to be the second largest economy. It's going to displace the United States as the largest economy, and it's going to be seen as a peer competitor to the United States within my lifetime. Never. People would have thought you are smoking something if you were to do that. And here we are, within our lifetimes, this has happened.
Well, absolutely. And especially after 1989 in Tiananmen Square, and China was not isolated, but certainly not popular.
For a period, they were. It was the Bush. They were cut off for a brief period, and then it was Brent Scowcroft that did the secret mission that started to pull. And this is the irony about U.S.-China relations, that it was the United States that in many ways brought the Chinese back out of isolation from Tiananmen Square. It was the United States that shepherded in
World
China
Trade
into
Organization.
the World Trade Organization.
Yep.
It was the United States that transitioned away from most favored nation trade status and into a permanent trading partner. It was, the United States has been absolutely instrumental in China's success, not to mention the fact that it was the American fleet that really made it so that China could focus, and most of Asia could focus on its domestic economy and not have to point guns at one another and devote so much of their resources to shooting each other. And that has been something that's overlooked quite a bit in this part of the world.
Well, absolutely, and I think that, and that's something I get a little bit irritated for a long time because we spent our national treasure protecting the world's lines of communication, keeping them open. The Straits of Malacca largely free from piracy, although not exclusively, but the Chinese able to ship their goods through there, and everyone else, including ourselves, because of the work of the Seventh Fleet and others, and also the Sea of Japan, keeping the tensions tamped down between China and Japan as much as possible. Although that's always a challenge. But
we never saw that as charity, by the way.
No, it's not charity.
This was in our best interest to keep these sea lanes because we, as the largest trading power in the world, benefited from the free movement of people, ideas, and goods.
It is in our strategic interest, and that's why we did it. And people often talk about why we're a global policeman. We're not a global policeman, but certainly someone. The British Navy, in some respects, did much of what we did for a period of time in history. In fact, the end of the slave trade from West Africa, the British fleet was the organization that started interdicting the slave trade to the Americas. That was the Brits that did that. The point here is that, the global commons, the United States has done a lot to protect the global commons, and we get very little credit for it. And that's fine. It's not about, getting a pat on the back. It's about our strategic interest and what's important to us.
Well, we've profited from it enormously.
Of course.
So forget about getting a pat on the back. This is not, softball for third graders. At the end of the day, the United States became the global power it was because it did those things.
Oh,
and
exactly.
That, at the end of the day, is the most important thing to measure. Those are the results that count.
Well, absolutely. And then the free floating of currencies, the introduction of the International Monetary Fund and the Bank of Settlements, which later became the World Bank, all of these things certainly played a role in the United States ascendancy. And the fact that we weren't obliterated in the Second World War didn't hurt. That gave us a good head start. That gave us a good head start. But no, absolutely. No, it's in our strategic. But here's the thing. When I was a young man and I was at the Gulf War, the first Gulf War, well, not really the first Gulf War, but our first Gulf War, because the Iranians and the Iraqis already fought one.
The Bush Senior War, right?
Yes, well, if you want to call it that, but the Persian Gulf War, it was a UN war. But anyway, I have a UN declaration for that war. But anyway, so that conflict, when I was there, a lot of people were screaming, "It's all about oil! It's all about oil! It's all about oil!" And I'm shaking my head about no American petroleum companies engaged in Iraq. So I'm shaking my head. I'm sitting there in the desert, miserable conditions, wondering why am I here. And at some point, I had an epiphany, and I started thinking about this, and I said, "Well, okay, so what if it is about oil? Let me explain. What if it is about oil?" Well, we're not getting our oil, by and large, even at that stage, from the Persian Gulf, the Middle East region. Most of our oil wasn't coming from there. We're getting oil from Nigeria, from our own. We're getting some from the Persian Gulf. But the reality is, without that oil, Japan and Europe would starve and freeze. And without Japan and Europe, the world's economy would collapse. And without Japan and Europe, the United States economy would be dramatically affected. And without us buying stuff, kids picking bananas and people picking cocoa in Ivory Coast aren't going to be able to sell those things because those luxury items go away. So there's a knock-on effect of this. There's a ripple effect throughout the globe. And, people cut back in coffee and suddenly people are starving in Colombia and in Ethiopia because they can't sell their coffee. So, I thought it was pretty haughty of people saying it's about oil. So what if it is about oil? The sad part of the truth is that the world's progress depends on safe, cheap, inexpensive, reliable energy. And whether people like it or not, at that stage in history, in 1990, it was largely petroleum that was a big source of energy. So if we want to go to solar thermal, we want to go to solar voltaic, we want to go to micro nuclear grids, whatever we're going to go to, whatever we're going to have. The point is that you have to have safe, reliable energy, and that's something South Africa doesn't have. And that's one of the problems in South Africa. We'll get to that here shortly. But so I had an epiphany about this. Fine, it's about the oil. And they did the same thing the second time we were in Iraq. It's all about oil, Halliburton. Halliburton nearly went bankrupt because Dick Cheney is a pathetic businessman and bought a company burdened with billions of dollars of asbestos liability, and Halliburton had to pay that crap out. And they made virtually not a penny off any of their contracts in Iraq because they're idiots. But it's all about Halliburton. Do a little research, folks. Anyway, but so it's kind of an epiphany I had about it back then. This is back to the global commons comment we're just having there about if we're there ensuring that that the Iranians aren't shooting tankers down or the Iraqis aren't stopping the flow of oil from Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, Dhahran. Well, you know what? That's not necessarily a bad thing. This is 1990, Eric. 1990, not the view on where energy is today, but that's the epiphany I had on. And the point is that that was a role that we chose to play because it was in our strategic interest, even if we weren't the ones consuming that oil.
Yeah. I guess part of the objection that people have with these wars is the fact that there's a credibility gap in them. And that's a credibility gap that dates back to the Vietnam era, where the government and the military say one thing and actions speak differently. So I think this speaks to the fact that the United States military oftentimes lacks credibility, or actually the political leaders lack credibility in the justification for wars. And so it creates this environment where people are saying it's about X, it's about Y, it's about Z. And that's just because the United States has done a very poor job in communicating to its own constituents about what these wars are really about. So when George Herbert Walker Bush was saying it's about the invasion and protecting the international order, people felt that was, because again, because we've seen violations of that international order in other parts of the world where they didn't launch an invasion.
Crimea, they did launch an invasion and annex it. There was no world condemnation.
Well, there you go. And you're not sending in the fleet to do that. And so people then said, well, the only other factor that's in play is the oil.
Yeah.
But again, this speaks to the lack of credibility that I think that both the U.S. and its military leaders oftentimes have in communicating these policies and to build to mobilize support at home for them.
Absolutely. And listen, I think there's a watershed event here that really, in our lifetimes, well, maybe not yours, you might be a couple days younger than me, but I'm not that much older. But
not that far.
Yeah, I was going to say, but in our lifetimes, a watershed event that happened when I was a small child, but a watershed event that really changed this whole calculus. But now let me just be careful here. The conduct of our military should always be under scrutiny by civilian authority, by the press, by the public. We should always be asking what our military is doing. And this instant veneration of the military is not something I'm comfortable with. I've never been comfortable with it. I came back from Africa after 9/11, and I was wearing an Army rain jacket, and people were like, hey, thank you for your service, thank you for your service. And honestly, at the time, I'm like, well, you're welcome. I was kind of befuddled by it because I've been in the Army already for about, at that point, 20 years, and I'm like, rarely did somebody thank me for my service in the past. And I'm like, thanks, but hey, don't forget to thank a law enforcement officer, EMT, a first responder. They put their lives on the line every single day, and they make a difference in society. But my point is that this veneration kind of bothered me. But so when it comes to holding the military to account, we should always do that. And let's be honest, for most of our history, we got a free pass of that in many respects. If you look historically, the U.S. military was seldom criticized or attacked as an institution. But one key event in my mind changed that. I mean, we had conduct that was reprehensible in the Second World War. You can go in the island hopping campaigns. Flamethrower is a pretty brutal, inhumane method to conduct a war, if you want to start with that. And there's plenty of other things that happen in the other theaters. But Ted, we had military leadership and we had political leaders telling us that the conflict in Vietnam was under control and that it was all but over, when in fact it never was, because we had not defeated the Viet Cong until Tet. We obliterated them in Tet. The Tet offensive is when we absolutely obliterated the Viet Cong. They're no longer an effective fighting force of that. But it didn't matter, because something you just alluded to, and this is a long response, but it brings all that together, Eric, something you just alluded to a moment ago, is America is abysmal at strategic communications. And I've been angry about this for decades. And that's one reason why when I was in Africa, I wrote so many news articles and I did so much work communicating with the press and with the public, because we are abysmal at strategic communications, not just public affairs for our own public, but trying to communicate to the world what it is we're doing, why we're doing it, and why we don't do this, and what we hope to achieve. And there's nothing wrong with doing it, but that phrase has fallen in disfavor with the diplomatic community. I don't know why, because it's a great phrase, strategic communications.
They've never really been good at it. The problem was they never had to be, because we were, in many ways, we were alone. We were at the top of the pile, and there was never a competitor. I mean, the Soviets were certainly a formidable competitor, but in the communications realm, we had we had McDonald's and Marlboro and Levi's and the culture and the values and all these different things that kind of spoke for us. The problem now is those things don't carry the currency. And you talk about Tet and you talk about Vietnam, and we can talk about Vietnam. I'm sitting in Vietnam today. There's a lot of parallels to what happened in Vietnam, to some of the difficulties that the United States, both as a country and as a military in specific, are having in fighting its wars. In many respects, there's a lack of imagination within the military leadership in terms of understanding and this is again, thinking about China, and we can move the conversation to China. China is a competitor that we've never faced before. Mm-hmm. And what the United States likes to do is we're always fighting the last war. Yep. And this is constantly our problem. We cannot envision what's around the corner. And that is a serious problem. And we're seeing this today. And it's in part because there's this massive knowledge deficit within Washington and the Pentagon about China. And you can see the gaps in the understanding and the effects that they have. And again, when you look at The Fog of War with Robert McNamara, and he starts to recount the mistakes that they made, he fundamentally did not understand who the Vietnamese were and why they were fighting.
Yep.
We did not fundamentally understand who was the Iraqi resistance and why they were fighting. We did not understand the Taliban and why they are fighting. And we don't understand the Chinese as well. We have an enormous pool of people in Washington, in the think tank community, in the academic community, who are putting up all sorts of things. But you have this groupthink that has taken hold, and it is toxic and it is dangerous. And I will tell you that there are very few contrarians on China in Washington. And that, to me, is unfortunate.
Well, I'm not in Washington, so I wouldn't be one of the contrarians. But I am a contrarian. But I'm also not a fan of the Chinese Communist Party. but I am a contrarian, and on this whole cooked up competition, China and Africa, China and Africa, China and Africa, U.S. and China competing in Africa. It's all nonsense. We surrendered. We're not even competing in Africa.
I was about to say, I'm glad you went there, and it looks like you and I might actually agree on more than I anticipated. There is no competition. So the trade numbers just came out this week. So China, the 2021 trade numbers, both the U.S. and China this week. And let's just kind of frame it up here. And trade is one measure of performance. It's just one metric. It's not the only metric, but it is an important metric, and it shows a level of engagement. So the Chinese numbers came in at $254 billion in two-way trade, it was 148 from China to Africa and 106 from Africa to China. In the United States case, 58 billion. And that 58 billion, by the way, is a $13 billion increase from 2020. Yeah. But we're looking at a 4.37 multiple between what the Chinese are doing on trade and what the Americans are doing on trade. As you pointed out with Nigerian oil, you made a reference to, once we stopped buying energy from Africa, basically trade just went off and basically Africa was a 7-Eleven fill up where we got a little bit of, we got some fruit just to, for the car ride, and then we filled up the SUV and then we took off. And since then, there has been nothing to follow through. And there is just this absence of, again, we talk about this absence of imagination in our foreign policy. We've had no new major initiative in Africa since PEPFAR and George W. Bush's administration. Yep. There's been Power Africa. There's been Prosper Africa. I mean, but none of them move the needle. And when you look at the scale of what the Chinese are doing in Africa, so at the last FOCAC, which is the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation Conference, this is the triennial.
But this was virtual. The last one. Last one's virtual. Right?
It was no. It was not virtual. And this is the very important thing. It was in Dakar, Senegal, and the foreign minister Wang Yi was there.
But Xi Jinping wasn't there. He didn't go this time.
Xi Jinping has not left China in 2 years. Yeah. He's not going to leave his hermetically sealed bubble.
Yeah.
And we can talk about Xi later on, but the fact is that they have the balls to show up.
Yeah.
Okay. Blinken has gone once since he's been in office, and the first time he canceled because of COVID, and he did this thing called a virtual trip to Africa, which is I mean, they think people are stupid.
Yeah, they do.
Okay, a virtual trip is what we call a Zoom call, like what we're doing. You and I are doing a virtual trip to Pennsylvania.
Microsoft Teams, yeah. Zoom. No, look, Eric, it's see that's the thing. See, people make assumptions. I'm not saying you do, but people make assumptions. They assume that because I was in uniform or this, that, and the other, I was part. That I believe, it's like they look at this beard and go, oh, that guy's on Duck Dynasty or he's a white supremacist. Grow up and be realistic. The world doesn't look the way people want to pigeonhole you. Listen, we don't compete in Africa. We haven't competed in Africa with China. We surrendered a long time ago. One of the things I decided to do with what I do when I grow up and I left the military is I want to start a consultancy, and I wanted to have a media arm of it so I could promote, people could see what they're getting from my services when I give presentations or speeches or I go somewhere, and I could also publish things. So that's where the YouTube piece went, and then it came up a radio thing, and it's I'm an online columnist now on a site in South Africa and some other things. But that's kind of there, and it's whether it makes money or not isn't the issue. I'm trying to share news and views. So the other piece of it, the main part of it, was I wanted to make money and be able to travel to Africa by getting American business in the game. Where is Sprint? Where is Comcast? Where is American Airlines? They're not in Africa. And here's the bottom line. By 2050, Africa will have 2.3 to 2.5 billion people. No matter what we do, it's cooked in the numbers. That's how demographics work. It's going to be that big. They will have a consumer class with disposable income of at least 900 million people. I've been saying this for 5 years, and almost nobody's listening to me. And if you're an American business and you don't get in game in Africa, if you keep looking at it as what I call C cubed, chaos, corruption, and coup d'etat. If that's how you see Africa and you see 54 C cube, you're not going to go there, then you are going to find us being a second-rate global power in the year 2050 because we missed the coming surge. There's no growth in consumerism in Asia. That's already eclipsed. There might be some. The real dramatic exponential growth in making money is coming in Africa, and we need to be there, and we're not.
I'm going to disagree with you.
Okay.
No, I'm going to disagree with you. I mean, Southeast Asia, where I am right now, ASEAN is a market of 600 people. The profile of Vietnam is very similar to what it is in Africa.
600 million people.
600 million across the 10 ASEAN states.
Yeah, you said 600.
Oh, no, sorry. 600 million people across the 10 ASEAN states. These are fast-growing economies, and the United States and U.S. business is simply not present here. And this is let me give you a story.
We don't really disagree. I mean, I'm highlighting Africa rather than Asia. Yeah, there is.
Let me tell you about. I was in a coffee shop in Abidjan a couple years ago before all the COVID mess, and I went up to some kids. I speak French, and so we were in a cafe, and I went up to some kids, and again, the median age in Africa that your viewers probably know, but it's 19.4 years old. In countries like Nigeria, we're looking at 17 years old. This is a continent of teenagers.
It's 14 in Uganda.
14 in Uganda. So if you're not talking about teenagers, you're not talking about Africa today.
Yep.
So I go up to these kids and I say, qu'est-ce que vous pensez de les Chinois et la Chine? What do you think of the Chinese and China?
Yeah.
I said, I just want to get your take on it. Yeah. And they thought, they what's the white guy kind of at a coffee shop randomly asking them about China? But, they went, okay. And one of them turned to me and said, La Chine, c'est super. China is great. And he took out his phone and he said, China is great. And I said, that was not the answer I was expecting. And so then I said, well, why? What's going on? He said, I love Boomplay. I love Huawei. I love Star Times. I love Transnet. I love TikTok. Because what do teenagers do? They see the world through tech. Doesn't matter if you're in Ivory Coast or if you're in Indiana. You see the world through this. And so one explained me, and it's very interesting. He said, I touch China 100 to 200 times a day. I said, He said, when I get up, my phone is Chinese. The music that's on my alarm is Boomplay. Boomplay is the Chinese music service in Africa that is crushing Spotify and Apple Music. About 60% market share, huge. He says, I turn on the TV, Star Times, as you know, Chinese. He says, the pot that I boil my water for my breakfast, that was made in China. The roads that he's taking into his work, Chinese construction crews are building it. He goes to work and he's got they've got office equipment all imported from China, the clothes. The point is that China is relevant in the daily lives of hundreds of billions of people. And I asked him, I said, how much times do you touch the US? And he said, other than Facebook and YouTube, not at all. They're not relevant. And we are living off the fumes of a generation ago where we believe that our soft power is Beyonce. Let me just be very, very clear. That Hollywood and that music is not being consumed anymore in many parts of the world simply because people are spending most of their time on social media consuming their own content. We have the rise of these regional media hubs like Nollywood and South African media. So there's more local media. And again, we live in this globalized culture where somebody goes to Starbucks and has no idea, is Starbucks an American brand or a French brand? It's a global brand. There's nothing identifiable about the United States. So again, when we talk about the soft power, people know this stuff comes from China. It's very, very effective and very, very powerful. And again, that's something, again, the relevance in people's lives. I'll say it's the same thing here in Vietnam. People are consuming Korean culture. They're consuming Chinese technology. There is no presence of the United States or very little of it here.
No, absolutely. Well, there is, but people don't see it because it's underlying it. It undergirds it. I mean, it's a security environment produced by that, but people don't see that. They don't care about it.
But again, that's fading now because the Chinese are the Chinese have the largest navy now in the world, and they are very, very, they're a peer competitor here in Asia.
They are.
So they absolutely, this is the only place in the world where they're really a peer competitor. And so the United States, and again, a lot of people have questions about whether the United States would win in a conflict with China in this part of the world. And so that really undermines the confidence that people have in the whole U.S. brand.
But that was just the first point I was getting through for undermining. I mean, the very phones that kid's holding up either run off of Android, or they run off of Apple, or they run off of, not Symbian. Symbian's dead for Nokia, but they run off of stuff that's built by American companies. But people don't see it because it's the underlying operating system. You don't turn it on and go, "Oh, look, I have Android. It's an American product." to your point, but it's there, but people just don't see it. But that's the reason why I've tried to do consulting, get American business in Africa, because we are losing that war. We're not even competing in it and don't even realize it. But, people think that everybody wants Levi's. Really? 60-year-olds want Levi's that they can fit into that 48-inch waist. That's who wants Levi's, not 18-year-olds, But China is everywhere. They're ubiquitous. And it's not, I'm not saying it's good or bad or it's anybody's fault or it's anybody should be praised for it, but the United States is largely responsible for it, as we talked about earlier. We sponsored their entry into the World Trade Organization. Despite their conduct, we are the ones that got them in there. We brought them back from the wilderness after Tiananmen. It's just, and I find it hilarious to see the smart people in the diplomatic corps and in the think tanks in D.C. and in the policy establishment that run around, whether it's in the Obama administration, the Trump administration, or the Biden administration, going, oh, China and Africa, we're competing with China. Dude, game over, man. It's like watching aliens. I don't know if you keep it score. We just got our asses kicked, man. We are so far behind here, and it beggars the imagination. It really irritates the heck out of me.
But let me just walk people through kind of what's happened in the past couple of months. So in the run up to FOCAC, the Chinese issued I think it was a 47-page white paper on Africa. That white paper basically was 47 pages of here's our vision, here's our offer for Africa. This is what we think this is what we think, this is what we want to do, this is our objectives. Okay. Then they did FOCAC, and out of FOCAC came 5 documents. There was a Dakar action plan that was basically, here's where we're going. This is the pillars. This was a joint thing that was done with Africans. So the white paper was 100% Chinese. The Dakar action plan is something that was done jointly with African stakeholders. So it was a reflection of both shared objectives. Then we have a climate objective. We have a number of different documents. The point here is that the Europeans and the Americans have no equivalent of this. So the key question is, when you sit across from an African policymaker and they say, I know what the Chinese want, I know what they're doing, I know what their vision is, I know what their offer is. What is your offer? What do you want to do here? And the Europeans and the Americans have nothing. Yeah. And nobody can explain inside the State Department, the Pentagon, the CIA, or we talk to them all the time. They're our largest group of subscribers. We say, what is the American offer? And they will talk about, governance and democracy and things like that. The problem is the United States today lacks the credibility to speak on those issues. And it's not the priorities for African countries. Remember, we're talking about 14-year-olds in Uganda, 17-year-olds. What they want are jobs and opportunity and tech, and they do not want welfare. Yeah. We did a show a couple of months ago about the France-Africa Summit. Fascinating thing that Macron held in Montpellier in southern France. And he invited 13 young Africans on stage. And I don't know if you saw this. It was a fascinating moment. And these 13 young people just lit into him. Yep. They say, we are sick of the paternalism. We are sick of charity. We are sick of the aid. What we want are jobs and opportunity and to be treated with respect. And your charity demeans us. Yep. And this was coming from the young people. And so when the Chinese come and sit down with them, they say, listen, we don't do aid. That's not our thing. We're going to do business with you. You'd better be prepared. And what they're learning now, Africans, is when you do business, there are consequences. The same way, Chris, if you don't pay the mortgage on that lovely house of yours, they're going to take your house. No, and they're right to take your house. They're absolutely fair and legitimate to it. This is what business is. And so when we see the whining and whinging that we're having right now in many African countries about the fact that the Chinese are not easing up on the loans, this is what business is. And the knowledge deficits are chronic in Africa too. And it's frustrating. It's very frustrating.
Eric, what have you heard me say consistently throughout this? So why I wanted to start a consultancy. I want to get American business investing in Africa. The follow through on that is that because, a rising tide lifts all boats. I don't want us to be a second rate power, but Africans can profit, get jobs and build infrastructure and develop things. We've seen some minor investments in Africa, but it's a joke. It's, and you're absolutely right about that. And that's the point I've been making forever about this is that it's about getting somewhere. It's not about getting something. Yeah, there are always people who are latchers on trying to get things, but this constant thing about aid. And the one thing that DC likes to crow about, they've been silent about it now for a bit, but they always want to go on about the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act. On the surface, the African Growth and Opportunity Act is okay, fine, duty-free access to our marketplace, but it's not reciprocal. So great that we let Africans ship their goods here, but it's mostly energy that comes in. It's only a couple countries like South Africa that have substantive trade, and frankly, that trade would be there even if there were duties. And it has all these conditions. The Chinese aren't attached to these conditions. It's Nigeria's pissed off at us because we wouldn't sell them Super Tucanos. Well, number one, we don't build Super Tucanos. It's a Brazilian plane. We do it now under license with FMC Corporation. They build it and they manufacture it and then they ship it to Nigeria. And it took 8-9 years to get it. They wanted to fight Boko Haram. We wouldn't give it to them because we have conditions on human rights that our government wouldn't back down. So it took forever. Now, they could have bought them directly from Brazil, but they don't want them from Brazil. They want it from the U.S. because it's with the U.S. military. So the U.S. military buys it, gives it to Nigeria, and provides the services and stuff. And they were going to get it. They know that there's not going to be an issue with contracts. But the point here is that they're angry at us because we wouldn't give it to them, and we wouldn't give it to them because we put conditions on it. I'm not saying we shouldn't have conditions. We should. If someone like Sudan's just murdering people,
Let's be super clear here, and this is the reality of the new geopolitical environment. What did the Nigerians do? The Nigerians have turned and bought a pair, I think, of 4 Winlong 2 drones, 2 reconnaissance, 2 attack drones. Those drones, just like in the conflict in Ethiopia, also there was just some video that popped up on YouTube recently, the past week or two, showing the effectiveness of the drones on Boko Haram as well. Mm-hmm. So the point here is that African countries have agency. Yep. They have choices now that they didn't have 20 years ago. The United States, in many instances, is still behaving as if it says no to a country like Nigeria. Well, then Nigeria folds up and walks away and says, oh, too bad for us. We're not getting anything. Not at all. There are people at the air shows in the UAE, in Paris, in Beijing, who will line up and sell them anything that they want with no questions asked. No, it's a different world out there, and I'm not convinced that we really fully understand it.
Well, I agree with you. But the point is about agency. Africans have had it for a long time, and they just don't realize it or don't exercise it. And I've told Africans that for ages, that it's time to grow up. It's time to get past 1960, 1964, 1968.
Well, I think I see. You saw a lot of pushback in Uhuru Kenyatta's speech with Wang Yi. Yeah. Really telling, saying we don't need lectures. And guess who he was telling that to? Yeah. He was telling that to the folks in Brussels, London, Paris, and Washington. Yep. And I think that the engagement with Turkey and with Iran and with China, these are all new powers, and India as well, is an expression of agency. And I think that to me is exciting to see.
Well, I agree. And something that most of the world has missed, and I've been harping on for a decade now, and it just gets proven more and more each year, is Turkey's engagement in Africa. The country with the second largest number of diplomatic missions in Africa is not a European country. It's not China. It's Turkey. Turkey has more diplomatic missions on the continent than anyone except the United States.
Right. And Turkish Airlines flies to more places on the continent now than any other foreign airline. So it is, I think, even more than Emirates. They may have 37 locales.
Then they have surpassed Brussels airline. Brussels was the largest outside for a long time, but now
it is. Yeah. And those aviation links. And think about this. I did some research on this. So Turkey has the GDP of the state of Illinois.
Yes, but it has the punching power of a much larger country.
But it does $26 billion of trade every year with Africa. Okay. Yep. Last year,
that's up from like $2 billion 20 years ago.
Exactly. But last year in 2020, it did $26 billion of trade with Africa. The United States did $38 billion in 2020. We shouldn't be close to Turkey. That's the state of Illinois we're competing against.
We should be $500 billion a year with trade with Africa is what we should be.
We should be $500 billion, but try importing a banana from Africa into the United States, or sugar. Okay, because our special interests basically say, just like in Europe, the agricultural subsidies, $1 billion a day, will say nothing comes in. And that is the ultimate penalty towards people in the global south. So all of the BS that we're talking about in terms of how other powers are doing bad things to developing countries. And again, the Chinese, let's be very, very clear. The Chinese do a lot of bad things in Africa, and we can talk all about it if you want. I have no problem with that. The fact is, though, is that the United States on issues of debt relief has not made it a priority. Not once in the G20 summit did Biden's team bring it up.
Now, that's going to be something we're going to disagree with, but go ahead.
Well, the DSSI has gone absolutely nowhere. The common framework has gone nowhere. It was not if you look at the foreign ministers meeting in July in Rome with the summit that was in the fall, they literally copied and pasted the points on debt. Nothing has happened on debt. World Bank, IMF, even David Malpass at the World Bank is saying, guys, we have to do something here. The state of New York had an opportunity. The two legislators introduced a bill in the legislature of New York to ease some of the fiduciary requirements on the mutual funds and on the hedge funds so that they could engage in debt relief. That was shot down. The federal government and the Treasury never backed that up. We can go through a list of things that the United States could have done because of its power in the global financial system and has done nothing.
We can also go through a list of things the United States has done. HIPC, Heavily Indebted Poor Countries Initiative, HIPC 2, relieving.
That's old. That's not the current crisis. That's not the current crisis.
Yeah, and the current crisis. Current crisis, we've handed out low interest, virtually no interest, and no interest loans all over Africa, including $4.3 billion to South Africa at 1% interest rate, which will never be repaid. It'll be forgiven because of this black swan event. If anyone thinks that these loans have been given out, the billions of dollars handed out to Kenya, to Tanzania, to South Africa during this pandemic are ever going to be repaid.
Through the IMF and through the World Bank, or through the U.S. government?
No, through IMF and World Bank.
Okay, but I'm talking about the U.S. government here. That's a different thing. Okay. That's a different thing. The U.S. government itself, the Treasury Department, the Commerce Department, state legislatures like in New York have done nothing.
Well, no, they're too busy printing more money. They don't have time to do that.
But again, it is just, it's a moral failing on our part that we have not taken leadership of a global system and the rules-based order that we are so determined to protect.
Now, I agree with what you
the United States could have stepped up and really made a big difference.
I agree with what you said, but I'm tired of people welching on their debts. I'm like the Chinese. You need to pay back your debt. Because, by the way, those loans that were forgiven during HIPC weren't loans from the U.S. government. They were loans from Citibank and merchants, manufacturers, Hanover, and those banks. And who paid for that? We did as consumers, because African tyrants and governments misspent and abused and took money away in the 70s.
Well, you will really like what the Chinese are doing, because, boy, they've told the Kenyans, when the Kenyan government in July, or actually it was in June, said, can we get another 6-month deferral on the standard gauge railway loan? The Chinese said, nope. You got to pay. And they went, but wait a minute, all the white people are giving us this. And they said, well, you know what? You shouldn't have borrowed the money from us. Your payment is due July 1st. And they $761 million. What I don't understand is when you hear Westerners and you hear even Kenyans bemoaning this. And I'm just like, you signed a contract.
That's right. You have an obligation.
You have an obligation to do this. Now, I mean, it is tough. It is, it is the way it is. But that's business. I mean, I don't know what to say. I mean, it is a contract. I mean, and that is just the way that things work. And these are commercial rate loans.
Well, I know what you're saying. Make good on your debts, or don't borrow money.
Well, that's, again, people in Beijing will really like what you have to say on this.
That's all part of the nonsense. Listen, the debt trap. People. The Chinese are intentionally luring Africans in the debt. The only problem I have with debt to Africa is I think that in the rush and in the earlier days, going back a decade or so ago, and that's not really early days. China's been in Africa since the '60s. People think that's the other thing. Let me go off track. I'm so sick of hearing the policy establishment in the odd decade, China and Africa, like they just freaking arrived. The Chinese have been involved. Now, what's different is that the scale and scope has changed because China's economy exploded. But China's always supported things in Africa. It's flooded Africa with weapons. It's tried to do trade in Africa. It's supported political movements. It's always had its one China policy and pushed against everybody in Africa until they got down to almost nobody left that still supports Taiwan. But none of that's changed. The scale and scope is what's changed. But anyway, no, it's just this. Now I get off to my original point. I forgot it, but it was about the debt.
No, it's on the debt and debt trap, and we can talk about the debt trap.
Yeah. But I don't buy the debt trap. I mean, the Chinese. They did, in my view, with some of the conditions loans and the way it was done. It's done different ways through state-owned banks and different things, and also private ones. But the way it's done, I don't see it as an effort to take the sovereignty of African states. I don't think the Chinese want to own Zambia. They might want the copper in the copper belt, but Beijing might want it. But I don't. But think again,
it goes back. It goes back to your Iraq War analogy. Yeah. It is much cheaper for them to go out and just buy the copper on the global market.
It's a fungible commodity.
It's a fungible commodity. So this whole idea is that they're there to seize the copper, again, is rooted in 18th century colonial imperialism thought, which is just not the way the Chinese work. It just doesn't make sense on the surface because, first of all, and I've talked to a lot of folks at China Exim Bank, and I had a good conversation with them when Prosper Africa was initiated, the former national security advisor, who was the walrus with the
Bolton.
Bolton, there you go, with the mustache. And he was talking about how there was seizures of the power station and of ZNBC, the network. And it was funny because I had lunch with some guys from China X and Bake. I was in Beijing at the time, and one of them used to live in Zambia. And he's like, "Have you seen ZNBC?" And I said, "No." And he says, "It's two sticks and a light bulb." Yeah. He's like, "Why would we want to own that?" Exactly. Never in a million years. It doesn't make sense. Here's the key thing about the Chinese. Many people misunderstand them as behaving like an imperial power. Like you see this rhetoric about neo-colonialism. They're colonizing Africa. First and foremost, they are much more like Goldman Sachs than they are like the British East India Company. Mm-hmm. They are using Swiss corporate law for their contracts. They're using European standards of contractual law. In fact, they are flying in $500 an hour lawyers from London, Zurich, and New York to negotiate these contracts with African countries. The African side, unfortunately, is bringing their mid-level bureaucrat oftentimes to the table, to the negotiations, and they're being outgunned. So the contracts are weighted in favor. In the same way, if you have a divorce settlement and your ex-spouse brings in a $2,000, powerful lawyer, you're going to have a hard time keeping up with that person because that's just, you get what you pay for in legal services. And so the Chinese are writing these very, very tough contracts that are oftentimes not read very carefully. In the DR Congo, we know from the evidence that Kabila's people simply didn't even read the contracts.
They just signed it.
They just signed it because they got about $55 million put into their pocket.
Yep.
So, at the end of the day, and let's be very clear here where accountability lies. Right now, in the High Court of Mombasa, it is the Kenyan government that is fighting to keep the standard gauge railway contract secret. It is nobody else. It's not the Chinese. Well, the Chinese have their secrecy clauses in their contracts, but those secrecy clauses, there's a second clause. It's very important in the Chinese contracts that says that this contract is subject to the laws of the host country, of the borrowing country. Right. So if the borrowing country, their legislature passed a law that says all contracts, as Cameroon, by the way, has done, all contracts must be published on a website for everybody to see. The Chinese would accommodate that because it's subject to the host government laws. Yeah. Ecuador, Cameroon, there are precedents for this. But here's the dirty secret of it all. It is people like Kenyatta's government that fight brutally to make sure that these contracts are not seen by the outside world. So the burden entirely on the Chinese, that they are the ones keeping this secret, really strips agency and infantilizes the African side as well, because they do have agency. They have power in this process. And the Kenyans are violating their own national laws right now by keeping these contracts secret. Their procurement laws require them to be public. So again, these stories, they fall apart very quickly upon investigation. The debt trap narrative, again, there's no evidence for it. Here's the big problem with it. This is the big problem.
Okay.
We are focusing on fantasies that don't exist. Okay. The debt traps do not exist. There is no precedent. And everybody will invariably tell you about the port of Hambantota in Sri Lanka as their key example. And if you do even a 5-minute Google search on credible research on the port of Hambantota, you will find a number of credible scholars, not just from the United States, from Europe, from Asia, all over, who have broken down this deal and will explain in minute detail as to why this was not an asset seizure. Okay, so let's get the port of Hambantota off. There is no other evidence of anywhere in the world of a forced asset seizure by the Chinese here. And so when we're focusing on that, we're missing all of the other things that the Chinese are doing. I am starting to come to the idea that the Chinese actually, as much as they publicly detest this obsession that the Americans and Europeans and even a lot of Africans have with the debt trap narrative.
But they love it. It's a distraction.
It's a distraction.
No, they love it. They won't admit that, but they love it.
They won't admit it. But
as long as our leaders are talking nonsense, then they can go about doing business without being impeded.
That's exactly it. And I do a lot of trainings with diplomats in the U.S. and Europe, doing their kind of, they're going to Africa.
Well, you need to do a better job because it's still pretty stupid, our diplomats.
Well, and so one of the first things that I say that always gets the best reaction is that Africa does not have a Chinese debt problem.
It has an African debt problem. Most debt in Africa is owed to domestic banks, and if they didn't,
domestic,
they would collapse.
So you're getting to my point. Chris, I'm very disappointed in this show that you and I are agreeing
we agree too much.
This is not good for ratings and for what we're trying to achieve here. But
it's so okay. I get shadow banning. There's no ratings here.
I will say there's not an African debt problem. I say about 7 African countries have a Chinese debt problem.
Zambia, and that means Djibouti,
Djibouti, Kenya, a little bit of Nigeria, Angola, and you strip Angola out of
that's a huge amount of it because they got so many billions.
That's a third of the debt.
There you go. It's a huge amount. Yeah.
So a third of it. So here's the issue. And then when we look at Kenya's debt to China, and I just did this calculation for our subscribers this week, it's 8%. 8%. Nigeria, it's 3%. Now, if a country is going to take over another country on 8% and 3% of the debt, they, so the logic just isn't there. So I tell these diplomats, I said, if you're going to go to South Africa and you're going to start going on about Chinese predatory lending and debt trap diplomacy, as you've pointed out, South Africa gets the bulk of its borrowing from its domestic market.
Exactly.
They're going to look at you like an idiot. You're a moron because you obviously don't understand what we are dealing with here in South Africa, if this is what you think. So my advice to these diplomats is really, you got to do the homework and you got to really disavow yourself of these toxic narratives, which at the end of the day distract you from the more pressing concerns on environmentalism, on corruption, on all sorts of different flooding the market, on the trade deficits. There are so many things that are worthy of our attention with regards to the Chinese that are hostile and bad and destructive in Africa, but we don't focus on them because we're chasing ghosts.
We're chasing ghosts and we're navel gazing. We're allowing our country to be divided on spurious claims about the culture here, that most of which is easily debunked and people misbehaving. And we're navel gazing. We're looking at yesterday's events and projecting them into tomorrow. This lack of strategic vision really irritates me because I've always been, even as a lieutenant, as a young man, a strategic thinker. I mean, for instance, when I was in Botswana in 2000 and I talked to them about power generation, I said, why aren't you guys letting tenders out to build your own power plants? You can't count on South Africa's Eskom. This is 2000, Eric. You can't count on South Africa's Eskom to deliver you electricity into perpetuity because that country is now delivering electricity to people who never had it, who didn't have houses, who didn't have hookups, and their mining industry is going to grow. And if their economy grows at all, they are not going to be able to provide electricity to you. So you need to generate your own. You've got massive coal deposits here. And then we find out later on there coal bed methane, which is cleaner. They got tons of coal in Botswana. Why don't you develop your coal plants or your power plants? They didn't. They waited 10, 15 years. They diddled around with a contract, gave it to a Chinese company that did a shoddy job there. The Chinese companies can do a world-class job, but they did a shoddy job in Botswana, and it only generates 30% of its expected capacity even to this day, a few years later. And they're still dependent on importing energy. And it's the same thing with the United States. Where's the strategic vision? This total nonsense, no strategic communication to get our ideas out there, objectives, and no long-term planning. It's always yesterday's conflict. It's always what's happened in the past. It irritates me to no end. Everything I ever did in uniform in Africa was focused on not tomorrow, not to next week, not a year from now, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now. There are things that I worked on in Liberia that are coming to fruition today from 2007. And that's a true statement, by the way. And the same thing in Botswana and in Uganda. Things that are just now coming to fruition because it was a long-term strategic plan to get our partner to a stage where, now, that doesn't mean it was going to happen all the time. Events change, they change their mind. But the point is that you have to have a plan. China has a plan, whether people like it or not. That's on them. But the bottom line is,
that's a good point that China has a plan. But again, we are rudderless in our strategic vision here.
Yep.
I mean, and this is not just in Africa, by the way.
No, it's
Blinken
all
came
over
out.
the world.
It's all over. But Blinken came out to Southeast Asia, and again, you can make a compelling argument to the national security folks that Africa is not even a secondary priority. It's a tertiary priority, if it's even that at all in terms of national security.
Well, okay. It is. That's it. Okay. Tertiary at best.
Okay, you can make that argument. I disagree with that because, and I can tell you why.
Okay.
But that's a strategic mistake to think like that. But people do make that argument.
Hang on. It is a tertiary concern, but it should not be a tertiary concern. That's my position.
And again, yes, I agree with you. That it should not be, but it really is. I mean, and this is what China's done so well. Africa, more than any other part of the world, votes collectively in international bodies in en masse. So we are getting beat over and over again at the UN, at the World Health Organization, at pick your international body, in part because the Chinese have invested the time, the effort, and the money to mobilize this massive coalition that again is there if we were actually engaged. The same is here in Southeast Asia. Now, Southeast Asia, you cannot argue, is a tertiary priority. This is literally the front lines in the battle with China.
Okay, we should be there. Vietnam, you're there now, but Vietnam so desperately wants to be our best friend. At least they did a few years ago. Is that still the case?
No, I think that's a misreading of it. Vietnam, okay. Vietnam has Vietnam has because of its relationship with China. Okay, and let me just tell you a quick story.
Sure.
I was I used to run the largest business TV news channel, like the Bloomberg or the CNBC of Vietnam for 5 years, and so through that job, I had an opportunity to meet a number of high-level government officials, and I met a very, very high-ranking foreign ministry official. And we would just have this fun kind of smoking and drinking every 6 months kind of relationship, and so we went out and we're smoking away. And this was when John Kerry came to Vietnam and said, and it was the first time he was back since the war. This was when the United States became the largest trading partner of Vietnam. And I said, this is amazing. Look, imagine this. In our lifetimes, we were fighting each other. And today, look at us. We're best friends.
Nope.
He's like, I said, incredible. He said, Mr. Eric, very polite, very formal. He said, don't get too excited. I said, okay. He said, let me tell you how we think about these things in Hanoi. I said, okay. He said, the United States, it's like a mistress. You can do all of the things that you can't do at home. Mistresses are fun. You get away with everything. But he said, Mr. Eric, mistresses come and mistresses go.
There you go.
But China is the wife. And China will always be there. So let me tell you how this played out today. Kamala Harris, our vice president, comes to Vietnam about 2 months ago.
Yep.
Okay. Somehow her flight was delayed. Okay. And there are suspicions that the Chinese themselves were involved in it. It was one of these audible, they started, putting tones into the U.S. embassy, and there was this delay. So they delayed it for 1 day. And the thought is that the Chinese maneuvered in such a way to figure out how many vaccines she was going to bring with her, which was 1 million vaccines.
So they could top it.
So she brought a promise of 1 million vaccines.
They delivered
she didn't actually. No.
Okay.
It's even better than
this. Okay.
So her plane is delayed by a day. In the intervening time, the Vietnamese agree for the Chinese to bring in 2 million vaccines and to park them on the tarmac, so that when Kamala Harris's plane is taxiing by,
sitting there in the photo op,
from the gift of the people of China. And again, here is the point that I'm trying to make here is that the Vietnamese are, and again, Africans and Kenyans are in particular, are very, very sophisticated at playing these off one another. Yeah. We don't give them enough credit for this. Yeah. Number two, the creativity of Chinese diplomacy is something that we underestimate. And we just saw this in Ethiopia. And again, we should talk about Ethiopia. How right after Senegal, Wang Yi, on a totally unscheduled move, the Chinese foreign minister says, you know what, boys, drop the plane in Addis. We're going to Addis first. Okay, that was not on the schedule. I talked to some foreign ministry people. That was something that he kind of said, we're going to do this, F it, we're going to Addis. Why? Because Blinken was going to Kenya to talk about Ethiopia, while he said, I'm going to go to Ethiopia to talk about Ethiopia. Gangster move. Okay. Went for 24 hours, strolls through the capital, says, you know what? It's a peaceful, happy place here. Okay. All of the reports of war and chaos in the capital and the capital falling, not true. Great move. This is the dynamism of Chinese diplomacy. I don't say this to praise the dear Lord, Xi Jinping. What I'm saying is that there's creativity in their diplomacy that we are not seeing in our diplomacy. Okay, this improvising, this quick thinking. And let's remember, Wang Yi has been to Africa since he came to power in 2013 as the foreign minister 17 times.
Yep.
Okay, you know what they say? 99% is just showing up. Okay, we don't show up. We don't show up here in Southeast Asia. We're not showing up in Africa. Blinken keeps going back and forth to Paris. I'm convinced he's got an apartment in Paris that he rents out from Airbnb on his own. And I say this out of frustration. I don't want anybody watching this to think that I am anti-American or I'm criticizing the United States. The point is that we can do better. We can be better. And we're not. And that's my frustration. And this is why, again, I speak as somebody outside of the Beltway who's just watching this stuff unfold from here in the front lines of Southeast Asia, going, what is going on? We're getting beat. Kamala Harris, what she should have done, okay? She should have said, you see the blue plane? That's mine.
Yep.
You see the big gray one behind it with 5 million vaccines? That's for you, yep. Okay? We should have had the American Air Force flying a country like Vietnam that is still to this day starved of vaccines. My son can't go to school right now because there's not enough vaccines. That is a problem that the United States could have solved for a country like Vietnam. It has not. And that is a problem. Now what's ending up happening is the Chinese are filling that void. We're ceding the space to them in that soft power. Again, the vaccines are crappier. And Americans will default and say,
that isn't germane because people get jabbed in the arm. They get jabbed in the arm. Whether they get sick or not, they don't care. They've got that feeling.
But also, the thing about the Chinese vaccines is they're not as effective on the against infections, but they are effective at keeping you out of the hospital and from dying.
That's what they tell us about all of them.
Well, okay. I mean, again, we want to go down a pathway on vaccines, but this is something that the Chinese are taking full advantage of. And we have lost that public diplomacy and that soft power advantage.
Well, and no more obvious than in Africa. I mean, we got the Biden administration crowing about we're giving 100,000 doses to Botswana. And the Chinese are giving 2 million doses. What is that going to cost us to give 4 million doses to China or to Botswana? It's going to cost us nothing. Right. It costs us nothing. It's a drop in the bucket.
But let's be clear here: the Chinese have done a much better job at marketing their vaccine distribution than they've actually done. So total Chinese vaccine distributions, and notice the language I use, distributions, is 117.5 million doses as of this week, okay? Right. Now, for a continent of 1.2 billion people, we're talking about 52 million people getting vaccinated. Mm-hmm. That is nothing. Yeah. But yet, that is just nothing. Now, Xi Jinping, he, again, did a gangster move, okay? And in his FOCAC speech, said, you know what? We're going to commit to 1 billion doses. That's a big number for Africa, okay? And they're going to do it. And again, this is, within 3 years, okay? So 1 billion doses, and they're going to manufacture 600 million of those doses in Africa. So that is speaking to African concerns.
Absolutely. But I mean, you talk about it's the same sort of situation. China is good at telling people what they've done and not necessarily achieving it, which it does happen.
I mean, hey, listen, Coca-Cola, Ford Motor, McDonald's, that's just the nature of communications today.
Yeah, no. But I mean, it's like, so for instance, when it comes to climate, China promised back in 2009 at FOCAC, they said that they were going to focus on alternative energy and that was going to be the majority of energy delivered. But as late as just a few years ago, when I did a presentation on this in Denver and the Energy Summit for China, or for Africa, excuse me, the non-traditional things, the renewables, wind and solar made up just 7% of the energy capacity that the Chinese have built in Africa. Yeah, they run around claiming it's all green, and they're building a coal-fired power plant. That's going to happen.
I think you're going to see that go up now.
It will. But my point is that in 2009 they made a promise, and here we are in 2021. It hasn't come to fruition. They've gotten free publicity out of it.
This is where we, rather than debt traps, this is where we should be looking. The other point that I you talked about previous FOCAC commitments. The Chinese made commitments in previous FOCACs. In the 2018 one, it was the 2018 FOCAC in Johannesburg on the blue maritime economy about illegal fishing. They made a commitment. And they have done nothing on it, particularly off the coast of Ghana and in the Gulf of Guinea.
And South again, this with is abalone poaching. Yep.
Abalone poaching, all of this. This is what we should be focusing on. Yep. And they're getting a pass on all of this. And again, this is the kind of stuff that we cover in our show where we talk to civil society actors who are saying, it's written there in black and white ink, that they said they were going to do this and they didn't do it. Why is the international community not pressuring them. These are what civil society actors in Ghana are telling us on our podcast. And again, this is my frustration when we talk about these completely extraneous things when there are real problems that the Chinese are vulnerable on, by the way. Really vulnerable on.
Well, and I think that in this one, they're very vulnerable. In fact, you know, in Africa actually the African Union has a maritime strategy. It's the AIMS 2050, a brilliant strategy, which has never been enacted. It's a comprehensive strategy that deals with customs, immigration, offshore fishing, defense, security, brown water, blue water, all of it's in there. Every possible thing, but it's just not implemented. There's no interest, there's no effort by any countries in Africa to really follow through on this, even though the AU adopted it years ago when I was at the African Union. The African Union is a bit frustrating from the standpoint because while they are powerless and they own no sovereign control over any of its members, unlike the EU, they're not the same thing. They are a voice, but they're just too much in bed with China, with their gratitude for their lovely little building with all the listening devices in it. They really should be a louder voice on this, calling China to account for not living up to its agreements in FOCAC.
But to be fair, I mean, I don't know of a multinational organization as large as the AU or the EU or the UN that speaks with a strong voice. I mean, that doesn't work.
The EU does. The EU speaks with a pretty strong voice.
The EU is so dysfunctional, disoriented. The EU will speak. Here's the funny thing.
I didn't say execute. I said speak.
Okay, but okay, fine. You can say all the pretty words you want, but at the end of the day, you know, the French and the Germans, they're going to do what they want. And again, I think the EU is, and again, this is when we talk about Pan-Africanism. It just, it's a frustrating thing. I understand where the desire comes from, but trying to unify that many countries with that huge disparity from, Nigeria at 200 million people, this massive economy, very powerful, to Botswana, as you've talked about, their agendas are going to be very, very different. And we are as a country, who did this 250 years ago, and we're still struggling with it today.
Good point. Fair point. Well, that's one of the points I make about the AU, because people expect it to be this body to accomplish things, and it's a talk shop at best. It doesn't. You don't have sovereignty.
But that's important to talk shop, if nothing else, because there's not many forums
That was my point a moment ago, because that's one place where the issue can be raised, can be publicized, can be talked about to get people's attention. But Africans aren't paying attention to their maritime domain. That's a mistake.
No, they're not. And by the way, the issue in Ghana, for example, is the fact that on all the government is the one that's not enforcing their own national laws, and they're the one. There's corruption issues, and again, this is not me saying that. This is civil society stakeholders and activists who are saying this. And you would think that the Europeans would be more engaged in this, because what's going to happen when large swaths of Africans run out of sea-based protein? They're going to start walking, because people are going to go where there's food. And when the seas dry up providing food, and climate change will then take away the other part of the land-based food, people are going to start walking. And by the way, let's be very clear here. It's European ships that are also engaged in this kind of nonsense off the coast of Africa as well. The Chinese are by no means well.
They're among the most egregious. And in fact, the
Chinese are not alone here.
We have seen in Namibia the Icelandic fishing scandal there. That's outrageous what's happened there. Government officials involved in Icelandic company taking more than its share of the fish that come up from the Benguela Current. No, it's the Europeans. I rail on European fishing companies off the coast of West Africa in particular, but across Africa in general. It's not just the Chinese. The Chinese take the hit for it in the press, but they're not alone. But let me go back to one point and bring a couple terms, and we've talked about it very quickly. Hey, folks, you're listening to Chris White Africa here on the Indaba Africa channel. My special guest today is Eric Olander. I suspect we could talk for about 37 hours straight on these topics, and we'd agree on some, we'd disagree on others. But let me get back to two things: agency, and what I've said in my written op-ed pieces and articles and things that I've written about is that, listen, China and the United States and Africa, Africans have agency. Clever African politicians will use that agency to play off both those powers to get what they want. If the Chinese want to loan you money, get them to give you terms, if you're Kenya, by pointing out that, well, you know what, Blinken was just
negotiate
here.
A better deal. Negotiate a better deal.
Blinken was just here, and he's talking about, there. So it's if you can get a better deal from the Chinese, this is what I tell Africans, then go for it. Now, that's to the detriment of the U.S. economy, but Africans should do what's in their interest, in their favor. But there's no reason why they can't take advantage of this so-called great power competition, which is not a competition. We surrendered in Africa. So they really should use it to their advantage. But it's not just us. Do it against the Turks as well. Do it against the UAE, because they're actively involved in Somalia and Libya and other places and spreading their wings in Africa too. You really need to step up and put your big boy pants on if you're African politicians and represent the interests of the people in your country and your region, because you're going to do it. No one else is going to do it for you. And that's really where we're at. You have agency. You've got to exercise it. And sitting back and letting others, blame others, like Cyril Ramaphosa and his disingenuous lies about vaccine apartheid. I'm so vile and disgusting. Vaccine apartheid. So here's what I would have done as a strategic leader. When this pandemic took off, and Trump, rumors came out in April of 2020, there's going to be this big national effort to come up with a vaccine. And in May of 2020, Operation Warp Speed was announced. Okay, now it's out there. Now we know for sure it's not a secret. Well, first thing I would have done is have my foreign secretary in D.C. talking to the U.S. government, the State Department, and to the Center for Disease Control. Listen, we have an advanced pharmaceutical industry in South Africa. We have a huge population. We're already seeing lots of cases here, unlike the rest of Africa. We would like to be part of your trials. We'll volunteer people for it. We'll be part of the research. We'll offer our labs. We'd like to get a discount or a preferential price, or
I don't know. The politics of that are sketchy. As you know, Africans, this is one of the reasons why you have high levels of vaccine hesitancy in Africa, is because for decades and decades and decades, the pharmaceutical industry did do that. And I think politically, for an African leader to make themselves, guinea pigs early on in this vaccine trial, I think would have been politically very, very contentious for them. I thought you were going somewhere else with that, but I think that.
Hang on. I know you're going, and I refuted this from the outset too, because African intellectuals ran around when the vaccines were announced. Oh, they're testing on Africans. We're guinea pigs, and that's horse manure. Almost all the people that volunteer
for this. The optics of it.
Well, that's because
the politics is optics, though.
The strategic communications was abysmal. Almost every person that volunteered for these tests happened to be an Anglo-Saxon, North American, or someone in the UK.
They got paid.
Yes, of course. And that's who was volunteering for it. Those were the guinea pigs, not black Americans, not black Africans by and large. And people should have been honest about it. But my point is that they don't have to necessarily put volunteers in, but they could have been part of it. Could have done the research. They have labs. They did nothing. They could have put a deposit down. They did nothing. Sat back on their ass, did nothing, waited till it was developed, and then said, where's ours? Please, sir, more soup. And then they lied about it with race hustling.
So here's where I thought you were going, and
okay,
this is where I what they should have done. So the United States and Europe combined took out somewhere north of $8 to $11 trillion in stimulus. Okay.
Yeah.
The high end of what the World Health Organization and experts say is needed to vaccinate the entire world was somewhere, I forget the number, but it was in like $10 to $20 billion. Okay. Mm-hmm. What we didn't do in the stimulus is we didn't take out $1 billion and say, Pfizer, here's $1 billion. What we want you to do is we want you to build fill and finish factories in South Africa, in Nigeria, in Ethiopia, and in Vietnam, all places that have, as you pointed out, very robust pharmaceutical manufacturing capabilities. There's human resources that are there. We don't want you to give the IP away. We want you to do the same thing that Coca-Cola does, where they take the formula, they fill it in a bottle locally, and then they have a distribution network that goes out with it.
Yep.
We're going to subsidize you to do that. Why? Because number one, we want to remain the leader as the global public health for our soft power to show that the United States is still relevant and matters. Number two, we understand how pandemics work because we've lived through one in the 1920s, in 1918. Yep. And that says if you only, vaccinate me and you don't vaccinate them, then that's not going to work. It's like peeing in a third of the pool. So we didn't do any of that, and we abdicated our leadership role. And what's been fascinating is nobody has turned to the United States and said, where's the summit? Where's the leadership? Where's the plan? Previous generations of American presidents would have gotten together and would have brought together global leaders and said, this is what we're going to do. That's not who we are anymore as a country.
That's
and
sad.
In fact, the world is not even looking to the United States for that leadership.
It's sad.
That's the reality of where we are today, unfortunately.
Now, where you went is you went looking at it from the U.S. perspective. I was coming from Ramaphosa's perspective. I was going to come back to U.S. perspective.
Well, he wants factories and vaccines locally made.
Nah, he wants a race hustle. So he's a despicable human being. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you and I will disagree on that, on the race hustling.
Yeah, no, he's a race hustler since day one. He's a scam artist. He's a grifter, and where's his donations to the public? Wealthy South Africans have given billions of dollars. He's given not a penny of his wealth. Anyway, but that's another story. We can talk around another another time. Anyway, but my point here is that they did nothing to get in the game. They sat back like they usually do and waited, and then they had the audacity to attack people. Now, from the U.S. perspective, what they should have done is exactly what you said. I agree 100%. And I made a few comments like that. I mean, why aren't we discussing this? Why are we leaving it to the World Health Organization and Dr. Tedros, Mr. Cover Up the Cholera Epidemics? That's not the guy to speak about this stuff. Let's get the U.S. involved in this. But the U.S. should have done something like this. And what happened in the end is we still did it, because this is what happened. This is what happened in the end. So several opposed runs around and does his hustling. Ooh, vaccine apartheid. The global South, the rich white people in the North. Well, the North isn't white. It's a mix of people. But anyway, the rich white people, they're ignoring us. Well, here's the bottom line. The U.S. and the European Union gave Aspen Pharmacare $711 million. $750 million we gave them cash in hand. We also gave them the IP for one of the manufacturer's vaccines. And they also provide the diagnostic equipment to manufacture it in South Africa. And Ramaphosa is still running around for 3 months after that, crying vaccine apartheid. We are still waiting for the first dose to come off the assembly line from Aspen Pharmacare, who's had all of that stuff since August. This is a fraud of the epic proportions, and I'm sick of South Africa's behavior.
Okay, but it's not just South Africa that's running into.
It's the whole world. It's the whole world. We're all screwed. We have to wait for the people from Alpha Centauri to get here to save us.
Oh my goodness.
No,
we've gone to Alpha Centauri already.
That's
okay.
Right. Well, we knew we were going to get there eventually, Eric. Come on.
That's right.
Yeah. Anyway, no, but seriously, no. The whole thing has just been. You and I talked off camera. That's why I was chatting for a few minutes before we started, a few minutes late. But I mean, my perspective on this is, and it's a view. Everybody's got a view. Everybody's got an opinion. But this has been mishandled by so many people at so many levels for so long. It's frustrating, and not just that. The debt issue in Africa, U.S. engagement in Africa, the European Union is a joke in Africa. European countries bilaterally are a joke in Africa. I mean, the UK has no weight in Africa anymore. France wants to pretend it's a power in Africa by deploying military.
The Europeans have made it pretty clear about what their priorities are in Africa, and it's to keep the brown and black people on that side of the Mediterranean. That is the overwhelming political priority for Europeans, is immigration. Certainly
for the EU, that's definitely the case. Yeah,
certainly for the EU, and even for national leaders. I mean, you look at a guy like Macron, who's under serious pressure from his right. Yep. Also in Germany, they're under pressure from the right. UK, immigration, Swedes as well. Yeah. And immigration is that issue. They see statistics that 40% of people in the Middle East, of young people in the Middle East, that was done by a recent poll, want to migrate. And that keeps them up at night.
Can you blame them?
Absolutely. No. I mean, I don't blame them. And so the key issue here is, what is an effective policy at making sure people stay where they are? So number one, combating illegal fishing. Number two, fighting climate change. Number three, creating jobs and opportunity. Yep. I think, and again, we need to go back to what those young people were telling President Macron, which is the aid is simply not working.
It never has worked.
It really, again, the aid, and we have an invested aid industry in the U.S. and Europe that is so effective at propagating themselves inside the budget process that they're almost impossible to remove. And the amount of money that we spend on aid, and what I found fascinating when I lived in Kinshasa for some time, what was so fascinating is every year in the Congo, $1 billion of American taxpayer money goes flowing through. Yeah, and one of the most amazing things that you see in the Congo when you talk to these aid professionals is the game is about getting the money.
Yep. And
then they deliver the money, and then there's no follow-up. Did it actually do anything? Did it achieve any results? And again, this is not unique to the United States. I'll tell you, it was a Western aid agency, I won't name it, but they flew us out to Goma in Eastern Congo, and they had this whole campaign. We were running a media company. And so they said, would you guys take a look at our public relations initiative about trying to encourage Congolese men not to rape, because rape is a very, very big problem. Mm-hmm. We said, sure, we'd go out. So I take some of my team, we fly out on these, on these dilapidated planes, which I'm sure you've been on.
Probably Aleutians.
Yes. And then we get out and then they show us and they say, all these campaigns of real men don't rape is bad, coffee mugs, billboards, the whole thing. And one of my staffers kind of pulls on my shirt and says, Patron, can I say something? I said, well, of course, that's why we asked you to come. He says, no one reads here. You're just like, you guys can't be this stupid. So I go to the big boss and I say, fantastic program you guys have got here. Fantastic. Looks fantastic. one tiny little problem.
Everybody's
These
illiterate.
are oral. These are oral societies. These are not literate societies because you're in the rural Eastern Congo. So all of this, and they say, yeah, I know, but the people back in the home office, they don't understand that. They couldn't approve it if it was, so we just gave, and we're talking like, this was like a $5 million initiative. And you're thinking to yourself, $5 million in the Eastern Congo is just an absurd amount of money.
Yep.
And the stupidity is bottomless. And this is where you just, you just look at it. So, and then they just ignored what we had to say, and then they went on. They ran the campaign
on
anyway.
Their merry thing, yeah.
And then they bring in these people who write these big reports to talk about how many things that they did and how many lives it's all made up, and then they send it down the line. They get funded again next year,
and they give themselves awards and promotions.
That's right.
And they travel to conferences in Montpellier,
in 5-star hotels.
Yeah.
Yes, and they stay in really beautiful hotels. It's
it's sad.
That is a racket. That is a racket.
It is a racket. The aid game has been a racket for decades. It's been exposed by a number of people many times in publications and articles. And I have the advantage of having worked with many of these aid agencies and projects because we do much of our development through aid agencies and not direct government to government because of the fraud that's happened in the past. But, it's really frustrating. But what's lacking here is what's lacking in international capitals and our strategic vision is a lack of situational awareness. That's the reality. So I see Americans, they go to Africa and they go someplace like in the Congo and they see ballots for elections. Like, how come the picture of the candidate's on here? Well, maybe you ought to listen to the story Eric just told you about Goma. There might be a reason why the candidate's picture is on there and the flag or the symbol for the party's on there, because people can see that and visualize it. They can't necessarily read it, but they understand that. And they know when the guy comes around, they remember the face and they look in the ballot, and that's why they vote for that guy.
And there's on situational awareness, there's something that's really interesting. And this is, again, one of the differences between the Chinese and the Americans. One of the things that you'll see about Chinese diplomats in Africa. So, for example, I in my newsletter, every time there's an ambassadorial change, I publish a little profile of who this person is. And what's so interesting is that you'll see the ambassador of Comoros or Seychelles, for example, tiny little posts, has spent 15 years on the continent. 15, 20 years sometimes, 10 posts, north, south, east, west, all over. The United States has an old, and the UK and Europe do this as well. This is a Cold War, tradition where every 2 years they'll rotate people out, or 2 or 3 years, so that they don't want people to become too embedded in that region. So that back in the Cold War, it was because you'd make yourself more vulnerable to Soviet espionage and to Soviet being compromised. The problem we have today, and I know this because of my own discussions and the work we do with the State Department, is we will get somebody up on their competency on the Chinese in Africa, and then I get a notice that says, oh, sorry, we need to switch this email. The newsletter doesn't go to Bob anymore. It's going to Jane because Bob is now being sent to Bolivia to work on, the Apple trade. So all of that expertise that Bob has built up in 2 or 3 years is just now gone. And now Sylvia comes into the role, starts completely over with no new knowledge, and then she kind of works her way up. And by the time she starts to get situational awareness, she's rotated out. And you have this constant cycle. And then the other problem that we have is we still have this boneheaded tradition of appointing political appointees into ambassadorial positions, which, tell me why Eric Garcetti, the mayor of Los Angeles, is qualified to be the ambassador to India. I mean, those days are gone. And here's again why I don't think we fundamentally understand who we're up against. Because when you have these ambassadors, particularly to places like South Africa, who we had the handbag queen, under the Trump administration, and she, and then you've got someone like Chen Xiaodong right now, who was the deputy foreign minister of China. Okay. He is now the ambassador in South Africa. He's a heavy hitter.
It's a big statement.
It's a big statement. These are professional diplomats. They are not, a political appointee because they donated money to a campaign. We need to get serious. And I feel that at times our foreign policy is not serious because we're living off of our past legacy. And it's like Al Bundy, recalling the days when he threw 6 touchdowns. That's right. But Al, you put on weight. You're fat now.
You're bald.
Yeah.
No. Well, okay. Here I'm going to push back slightly, Eric, from a standpoint because I've worked in 8 embassies in Africa permanently.
Okay.
I mean, assignments there.
Good.
And I've been to close to 40 of them and worked in close to 40 countries in Africa for different varying periods of time and over the course of 2+ decades. Yes, there's merit to what you say, and there's a lot of accuracy to it. But I've worked extensively diplomatically with the Chinese, particularly in security affairs in Africa, but not exclusively also. And my experience in Africa is that that's where China is today. 20 years ago, that's not where China was. It was not the case. They didn't have these 15-year people on the continent. That sort of thing.
But that's where they are today. That's exactly where they are today.
And
that's right.
That's where they're at now. So they've gotten there. And in fact, my experience with the Chinese early on was almost comical, to the point it was embarrassing. You know how inept some of the diplomats and the military people were on the continent. You know, I had a senior colonel who thought he was the world's smartest intelligence officer because I was giving him all this information about what we're doing in Liberia. And I'm like, dude, I didn't tell him this, but I mean, it's the same thing I give to the newspapers. I just wrote a letter with a letterhead on it and gave it to you, but he thought he was brilliant. But they are there now. Now, to be fair to our side of the aisle, we have people like that too, and we have a lot of people like that
at the mid-level, at the staff level. We do.
No, hang on. In Africa. So in Africa, here's the thing. In most embassies in Africa, we typically don't have that. What we have is a bunch of first and second tour foreign service officers who know nothing about the region. It's their first or second time out. And then the experience is at the deputy chief of mission, the chief of mission, and the
DCMs and things like that.
And the different agency heads, and maybe a sprinkling here and there. Now, if you get to Addis, or you get to Pretoria, or you get to Abuja,
those are the big posts.
Right, there you'll have a bigger body of it. So we do have a mix of it. Excuse me a second. My alarm is set just as a backup. Anyway, but we do have a mix of stuff. But the problem is that you're right. We get someone, they go to Guatemala today. Next day they go to Eritrea.
Yeah. But and again, I don't want to put a blanket statement over the entire State Department because, and I really want to make sure that I convey the fact that there are a lot of really smart people who get it. And they are frustrated by it.
But they don't have the influence and power. That's the problem.
Well, that's it. And this is a problem between, you know, the what we call, you know, the 7th floor is where the secretary sits, and the 6th floor is where the kind of the high levels, and then they kind of go down. And information isn't getting up to the 7th floor. And then there's this block from the professional staff who you were rightly pointing out are very, very competent. They do know. Again, the junior staff are turning over quite a bit, and they lose that institutional knowledge. But the problem is, though, is that once they will tell you that there's a kind of invisible wall between them and the 7th floor, because the 7th floor is where things become political. And certainly during the Trump years, decisions were being made in the White House by the Trump family themselves. Pompeo was not relying on the professional staff as much. Mm-hmm. What we see now today in the Blinken State Department is, again, they're just... Actually, I don't even know what they're seeing in the Blinken State Department today. It seems
opaque. I'm having a hard time getting insight. And I know
it just doesn't. You know, when he came out and did his speech out here, and it was very similar to his speech in Dakar, which was the big speeches for those regions. So he gave a speech in Indonesia and he gave a speech in Dakar. Those were regionally the two big speeches. They were almost carbon copy. We don't want you to choose, you know, between China and US. You know, we're about freedom, democracy, and open markets, you know, blah, blah, blah. And you ask people, and I asked a couple people here, I said, what did you think of Blinken's speech? And they're like, don't remember anything from it. I was like, but it just happened like an hour ago. And they're like,
an hour ago. Wink and blink and nod. That's what I call him.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I don't think Blinken is necessarily unique in this respect, but again, I don't think the United States has an offer. And when the U.S. comes to a part of the world like here or in Africa, now, just the week before Blinken came, the Chinese put the final touches on the $6 billion China-Laos Railway. Mm-hmm. So the fact is that those are, as Ariel Sharon used to say in Israel, those are facts on the ground. Okay, so when the Chinese are dropping into Southeast Asia, they're building railroads, they're investing in ports, they're building, you know, trade routes, they're breaking down tariff barriers on agricultural products. These are things you can feel, you can touch, you can see. Okay, and what is the U.S. offer? And the U.S. offer was saying, well, we don't want you to choose between the U.S. and China. We believe in democracy, we believe in freedom, we believe in open markets. Okay, got it, noted. Let's go back to getting the railway done. That's the problem. That's why people feel that we're adrift. We don't have an offer. And then when the United States does come, they said, we're going to bring, in the Trump years, they brought like $100 million to Southeast Asia. And you're just like, you're better off not doing anything.
It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing.
It's embarrassing.
That should have been $100 billion minimum.
It should have been. We're just not mobilizing. And again, if anybody believes Build Back Better World is going to actually become something.
No. Hey, let's segue.
Oh, sorry.
No. Let's segue here. You cut me off. I cut you off. It's great. We're having a great conversation.
Fair enough.
Yeah. No, but let's segue here. Belt and Road Initiative. Let me give you my take before we run out of time here. All right, Belt and Road Initiative. I think it's brilliant. I think the Chinese are brilliant. Let's see. I would love a plan in which I convince the world to build infrastructure for me so I can ship my goods and services all over the world and get the materials I need to keep my economy humming along. And I'll make the loans. I'll use my construction companies, and I'll get control of ports and airfields all over the world. It gives me insight and access and advantage. When I say control, I don't mean ownership. I'm going to control is influence. Okay. I get the influence, and hey, this is going to help my economy and increase my influence and my soft power and my hard power. I think it's brilliant. I think it's absolutely brilliant. If the crazy stands want to borrow money from China and can't pay it back, and the Chinese get more influence because they're in a bind, hey, all the better for China.
Okay, let me paint a picture for you about Belt and Road, because a lot of people have it's like a Rorschach test. Yeah. And this again is the actual beauty and majesty of Belt and Road is it's like the stripper, at the truck stop. She can be anything you want her to be if you put the money in the G-string, right?
There are no strippers at truck stops. That's in gentlemen's clubs. I know it's been a while, but it's a gentlemen's club.
Enough. I'm a happily married man. I haven't been to a strippers club in a truck stop in a
long time.
But the point is that it can be anything you want it to be. And that is something that, again, I think is very sophisticated policy making. So if you want it to be a trade thing, it's a trade thing. If you want it to be a digital thing, it's a digital thing. If you want it to be a health thing, it's a health thing. But let me tell you a story about Belt and Road that people cannot. This is how it's evolving. Okay. So a tea farmer in Western Kenya gets an order from a client in Kazakhstan. You just mentioned the stans. Okay. He takes the order on his Huawei phone, that came over a Huawei built network in Kenya through Huawei servers. That was all funded by China Exim Bank, He picks his tea. He then enters it on, the transaction is done through Alibaba or through an e-commerce platform. It's put into, but it's paid for in DCEP, which is the digital Chinese electronic payment system. So there's a virtual currency that is that's paid for. So there's no currency conversion between Kazakhstan and Kenya. It's all done through a cryptocurrency that is Chinese standards and Chinese controlled, backed by dollars and yuan. He then puts it on the train, gets out to Naivasha in the Rift Valley, and it makes its way on the standard gauge railway built and financed by the Chinese. Gets to the port of Mombasa, is then processed in the special economic zone. That is, of course, built by the Chinese. It's then picked up by a Costco ship, which is Chinese. It's tracked all the way from the point of picking or packing all the way to Kazakhstan on the Beidou global navigation system. And it goes into, overland through railways and ports on the other side into Kazakhstan all the way. Never once does it go to China. So this is the big mistake that a lot of people are making about the Belt and Road, is they think everything is about going through China. China will, export finished goods, import raw materials, and it's that Leninist type of cycle. That's not what it is anymore. This is about creating a parallel system to the existing international order. It does not use SWIFT. It does not use GPS. It's not using any Amazon it's not using Cisco servers. None of it is in the US or European orbit. And that is what this is about. It's about the battle for standards in the 21st century.
The Asian Infrastructure Development Bank,
All of it is about standards. It's the Beidou versus GPS. It is DCP versus, another blockchain currency. It is about using standard gauge railways instead of, other proprietary European railways, whatever it is. It's about using Chinese railway technology, Chinese aviation technology, Chinese maritime technology. These are the standards that they're fighting for right now. So that's how I encourage people to think about the Belt and Road today, is a battle for standards and norm setting more than, anything else.
Well, I appreciate where that's coming from, but for me, part of that still goes back to the part it's multifunctional. It does that, plus it also
It is. That's exactly it.
And it also gives China a bite of the apple in places that don't even touch China, as you just explained. That's a good example of it. That's what I
Kenya and Kazakhstan doing business, never going through China, but it becomes a global power that way. And that's a benefit for Kenyans and Kazakhstanis. I mean, it is a benefit for them. They're getting great services, and people are building tools and technologies and solutions that are customized for them. Apple doesn't do that. Amazon isn't doing it. Facebook. I mean, Twitter opened up an office in Ghana with all of, wait for it, 11 people.
I thought it was 3.
It's 11 people. I mean, like, come on, you're not going to transform the world on 11 people, okay? So they're not serious. The Chinese are serious about this.
See, we once upon a time did this. We came up with a modern financial system of the world. We developed GPS.
That's right.
Everything relied on GPS, from timekeeping
to finance transactions.
And every aspect, the HTML, the internet. Yes, I know Tim Berners-Lee was behind this wisdom, but the U.S., we developed the ARPANET. That's where it came from.
But we don't do that anymore.
No, we don't do that. There's no vision. There's no plan. It's all this carping and attacking and demonizing and stupidity and usurping authority from sovereign states in the union, and also just taking all this information from people and spying our own damn people. I'm sick of it. Why in the world does the federal government need to have access to transactions that are offshore that have nothing to do with Americans? Anyway, I'm going down a lane. I don't want to go down there. I don't want to go down that lane. That's the whole thing. But anyway, because I used to work intelligence service, so I'm going to be careful where I go with that. But
that's right.
Now, but
we don't want to get you in trouble. Any more trouble than you already get into.
No, I only get in trouble with PooTube. I'm fine. Anyway, so, no, but no, it's so frustrating because we did this. We built the modern world, and I don't mean to exclude the world, but hey, folks, wake up and smell the coffee. Yes, I know a lot of talented engineers and scientists came to America and participated in that. We did collaborate with Europeans and Japanese and even South Africa. Yes. But we are responsible for the world that existed when the Cold War ended. And we've been sitting on our duff ever since.
I agree. I mean, and so my criticisms, I'm always careful in all of my criticisms to make sure that people don't misinterpret the criticisms of the U.S. as some endorsement of the Chinese. They are not.
No, yeah.
My point is to criticize the U.S. because we are capable of doing better. We have done better. That used to be who we were. And I am genuinely hoping that we still have that left in us. I'm not sure, but I'm hoping that we do, because when we do it well, we do it amazing.
Well, that's true. And I don't want to say altruistically, but at least, more benign. I mean, but, I don't think we're going to go anywhere. I mean, the deputy premier of the Chinese Communist Party resides at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. So.
Oh, well, you and I aren't going to agree on that one.
I know. That's why I threw it out. That's why I threw it out.
You're snowflake if that's what you're trying to do.
No, just having fun with you, Eric. I told you beforehand. That's what I call it.
It's all good. It's all good.
Just trying to have a lighthearted moment there.
I'm very, as I mentioned, I'm very disappointed in this conversation because all day today I was like, I'm really excited to get into a tussle with Chris, and unfortunately, I have a feeling that you and I agree on more than we disagree.
Well, and that's the thing, I get people that come on my channel occasionally, like, well, I'm a leftist and I disagree with everything you say, and then I start explaining my positions, and they actually listen. They're like, okay, well, that's kind of what I believe. It's like today, so the things are so polarized, and not just here. They're just so polarized by the media and by social media and by people's emotional reactions to things. People who are centrist are painted as something they're not. So many of the things I believe in are classical liberal concepts. I believe in freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. These are classical liberal concepts. That's not a conservative position. It's not a leftist or rightist position. But everything is polarized, and people put you here, put you there, and it just drives me nuts, the juvenile behavior of people when it comes to stuff. You can't have a cogent conversation with so many people because they want to push that emotional button. They want to get that release of endorphins by pushing that key and calling you a name and stuff like that. And it's really counterproductive.
Well, that's what I mean. Yeah, that's what I try and do every day in the coverage that I'm writing about what the Chinese are doing, is to challenge some of these assumptions, again, to make people uncomfortable, and to and again, you'll be happy with this. I've been on just a tear the past couple of weeks on just the really just crappy, shoddy reporting coming out of the major publications like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Financial Times. And today it was the Eurasia Group. And I do these media critiques of the coverage just because, again, a lot of our readers are senior level policymakers. They are senior level think tank staff. It's a lot of the DC national security community. And I'm trying to get them to see that these narratives are destructive against their own long-term interests. Because at the end of the day, what I do with this newsletter and the website, and I do hope that your viewers and listeners will check it out, is to really, again, make them better in what they're doing in their negotiations and their understanding of these issues. And that's by challenging them. And again, I hope that through our conversation today, people are going to come away saying, well, are you pro this or anti that? Because I don't have a stake in any of it. I genuinely have no horse in the race. If the U.S. wins or the Chinese lose or the Africans, I don't care. Generally, that's not how I approach this. For me, it's all about just trying to tell the story as most accurately that I can, whatever that means. And then you as the reader can decide what you feel of it. And you've been following my stuff on LinkedIn for quite some time. And I get hit from the Chinese who say you're anti-Chinese, and I get hit from the Americans who say you're anti-American. Yeah. Like, well, I guess at some point you're doing your job right if that's what everybody thinks.
Well, it's funny you say that, because when I arrived in Liberia and the rebuilding of the Armed Forces Library was supposed to have been completed, but the Bush administration had underfunded the process, because I think when they signed up to do it, the transitional government, they didn't realize how expensive it was going to be and what it all entailed. I mean, it was literally everything. You had to build institutions. So when I got there, instead of having a new army of 2,000, there was just 102 soldiers. The proof of concept class had been done, and that was it. Now, when I got there, my predecessor left, and he was well loved by a lot of people, the contractors and others. The Minister of Defense hated him, but that was the exception. So when I left there, I was interviewed, and they said, so what are your thoughts about leaving now that the army is completed? There was still more work to do, but the 2,137 troops were trained. They were assigned to the barracks, and we were mostly down the road. As much could be done reasonable in 15 months. We've made great progress. And they said, so what are your thoughts? I was interviewed, and I said, there's two things. Number one, if I look back on this 10 years down the road, because that was the question, if you look back on this, I said, if I look back 10 years down the road and there's a war crimes trial because this army has done something inappropriate, I said, the good news is I'll be able to sleep well at night, because all the ammunition boxes that came from the East Bloc, they're all stenciled with Lieutenant Commander or Commander Dan Hunkin on them, U.S. Embassy. Nothing says Wyatt. So they'll look for him and not for me. That was the first point I made. And the second point I made was that I forgot my second point. We're going at this, but senior came up again. But yeah, anyway, no, it's just I had a really good point there, and I forgot it. I should have told that story.
You'll think about it tonight at 2 a.m.
Probably. Well, I'm usually up at that time prepping for stuff. But Eric, we could talk for hours, but I suspect you probably got other things to do. I guess I didn't understand one thing. Let me ask this before you go: is that are you based in Vietnam? I thought you were in China. Yeah. Okay.
No. So I was in China. So I've lived in China for 12 or 13 years total. Yep. I was in China from 27. When we did our show with you, I was actually living in China 2017 to 2019. Okay. So that's fair enough that you were. And then in 2019, I came back. So 2012 to 2017, I was here in Vietnam running FBNC, the big TV network here. And then we'll go to China for 2 years and then came back. And when I came back, I went full time with the China Africa project to launch it as a subscription service, right, and to try to make a go at this of making a living like what you're doing. And it's fun. It's exciting. It's hard as heck. I mean, there's no two ways around it. But this is the kind of work that you actually can't do in China. You cannot be an independent journalist writing about China in China. It's too dangerous now.
Well, that was the question I had. I was like, how are you still pulling?
No, regrettably, my days of going back to China are over now.
Yeah, they won't let you back in.
No. That's actually not it. They will more than happy to let me back in. Yeah. I'm too concerned that I am very vulnerable because I do a lot of work with people like you and people at the national security community, that in today's very contentious times that that you are vulnerable to being misconstrued as something that you're not, and you can get into a lot of trouble. And so my days, unfortunately, in China are over, which makes me terribly sad as a person, because the country, the people, the food, the culture, it's my whole life. I started studying Chinese at 15 years old. I have not stopped studying since I was 15 years old. I got my master's degree there. I've lived there. I was an intern diplomat in Shanghai. I worked in corporate there. I mean, so many years. But just the world that we live in today has changed, and we have to adapt to the world that it is. For me, I am focusing now on what China does in the global south. Yep. So we are rebranding the China Africa project next month. We're launching, by the way, in Arabic and French. Oh, wow. So we'll have the China Africa project in Arabic and French, and then we're going to rebrand our China Africa project in English to the China Global South project. Because one of the problems that we have, and Africanists are guilty of this to the extreme.
Yeah.
Is they look at things in these silos. So when you look at what the Chinese are doing in Africa, the vast majority of the issues are transnational in nature.
Yep.
COVID, ERI, digital, you name,
Trade.
tech, both trade and loans. All of this is transnational.
Yep.
And so one of the things I've been doing in the newsletter is I've been cross-pollinating, saying, look at what they're doing in Laos. Look at what they're doing in Southeast Asia. This is relevant for Africans here. Look at what's happening in South America. This is relevant for Africans. And trying to broaden the folks that, okay, you're going to like this, but DERCO, to not see the world at DERCO in this tiny little narrow prism,
Yep.
By the way, DERCO won't subscribe to our newsletter. You want to know why?
Because you won't give them a black minority stake in it.
No, it's been, people have talked to them saying, guys, you guys need to subscribe to this. They said, because even though my team is African, I'm white. Because I'm white, they won't subscribe to it.
Yeah, because they're racist. That's just bigotry. That's stupid.
Well, I mean, it's unfortunate, but that was the answer that was given to me by the people at DERCO. And that, to me, it's sad because, and again, in Washington, nobody is doing the depth of research on the Chinese that we're doing in Africa. So, for example, we picked up, we were talking to a major foreign service last week. We were talking to a major foreign service last week. And they said that we had a story about the public security ministry from China going to Nigeria, having meetings in Nigeria. We had pictures of it. We had all of this because it was all in Chinese WeChat channels. All this was being covered. Yep. That their own intelligence services and their mission in Nigeria did not even know that the PSB, the public security ministry, was in town for the Chinese. She said, only through your newsletter did we pick that up, that they were in Abuja. And I said, that I'm glad, but this is why I really want Africanists to start, they should be reading what we're doing every day. We have 4 people now working on this project in Arabic, English, and French, and in Chinese, who are bringing all of this incredible information into this newsletter and to the website as well. And I just think that if you want to understand the way the world is today, China is an essential piece of it. Like it, hate it, that's not the point.
You can't
got to understand it. You can't ignore it. And you see these Africanists out there, in academia and journalism and whatnot, and they pay no attention to it, and they don't get it. They just don't get it.
And this is what really torques me off. But this is, I don't know if it's American. I think it's a human concept. People look at you, or they look at something and they see it as a certain thing. So let me explain. When I got to the War College, I was director of African Studies, of course, you know that. So anytime anything Africa came out, I'll get a hold of Wyatt. Okay, great, thanks. I appreciate you including me. I'm also a 3-decade intelligence officer at all levels, including writing for the President of the United States. And when there was an intelligence thing going on, even though the rank or the brass I wear in my uniform and the title next to my name says military intelligence, I never get invited to intelligence stuff. Finally, a civilian who wrote about intelligence oversight, who came there as an academic, she had a conversation with me and she discovered I was intelligence, and then she started getting responsible. I got invited to everything. And the problem is that people look at someone or something and then they have an expectation. Listen, I was asked recently to help the Security Assistance Brigade in Fort Bragg that covers Africa, which is a disaster. It's another story. I went down there as a consultant and did some work. And then this company, because they were impressed with what I did, they had one for the brigade that covers Europe, which is based at Fort Carson, Colorado. And they said, listen, we're trying to compete for this. We need someone short notice. We don't know if you have the skills or not, but we like your ability, but do you have any Europe experience? I'm like, I spent a third of my adult life in Europe. Yeah, not a problem here. I've written on Europe. I've been published in Europe. I've taught in Europe. Anyway, so I threw that in my CV and sent off to him. But this expectation of people there are something they're not. And you get to the rebrand. Let me get the second. Now, I remember the synapses have fired. They've connected now. The rest of that story about Liberia was that, because you were talking about you pissing people off, and so I, when I left Liberia, my predecessor, most people liked him. He went to the cocktail parties. They liked him, but I mean, and I'm not denigrating his accomplishments because he accomplished a lot, but he couldn't show much tangibly. But all the grunt work that had to be done to make it happen, I was able to use that and benefit from. But anyway, I could show tangible progress. 13 companies activated, 1st Battalion, 2,000 troops, yada yada yada. So when I left, then they said, "So what are you going to say?" I said, "Well, my time in Liberia, when I look back at it." I got here, the contractors at each other's throats. DynCorp and PA were fighting each other publicly, and they were supposed to work for the U.S. government. The Ministry of Defense was mad at the embassy. They were mad at DynCorp. Everyone was mad at each other. I'm leaving here after 15 months, and everybody's mad at me. They're not fighting with each other anymore. So I'll call that success.
You're a magnet for it.
No, because I had to make things happen. Instead of squabbling, they directed all their attention to me, which is where it should have been in the first place to clean these things out. But you talk about rebranding here. I didn't realize that was happening, so I'm glad I got you on before we rebranded.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Now, my program is called Chris White Africa for lack of I was trying to find just something that caught on with people, but I don't just cover Africa. I talk about Myanmar on my program all the time. I talk about Taiwan. I talk about South Korea. I talk about Japan. I talk about New Zealand a lot. Jacinda Ardern is not on my Christmas list, but anyway, and the list goes on and on. But it's important, and I think that maybe the rebranding will play a nice role for you guys. But I guess if you're rebranding from English, it's not Africa anymore. I guess not much chance of me being a contributor to that site. Anyway,
no, not at all. Because Africa is going to be about 70% of what we do, because Africa has a disproportionate weight in the Chinese worldview in the global South. Mm-hmm. They place way more attention, even though the trade volumes are much higher, say with South America. New trade volumes with South America came in at $455 billion, $150 billion increase from 2020 to 2021 to 2022. That is considerably more, almost double what they're doing with Africa. But politically, Africa is far more important. And that's why we're going to continue to cover Africa as the core of what we do. So I do hope that you'll be a subscriber. I hope we can hear from you. I hope your followers will check us out. We do 30 days for free. So you can just try it out. If you don't like it, you can also just let me know, what you think. So, China Africa Project /subscribe. My email is Eric, ERIC @ChinaAfricaProject.com. I'm super accessible on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on email, you name it. I love having, you can see, Chris, I love having these conversations. 2 hours into it, I could keep going.
Absolutely. No doubt about it. We haven't been on air for 2 hours, but we're getting close. So we'll wrap up here shortly. But you see what I did there, Eric? That was a not so subtle way to suggest an opportunity for me to contribute and also give you a chance to make a pitch about your site. Anyway, so see, fair enough. Some people get strategic communications.
I get it. I would, it'd be fantastic. And I've enjoyed our conversation.
Well, listen, this has been fantastic. You've been very gracious with your time. It's great to reconnect with you. It's been a couple of years, and I think genuinely you're a little surprised by some of the things that we talked about. I mean, you're not just putting on airs. I think you're really surprised.
No. I was expecting. I mean, again, I love a good fight and a good argument, mm-hmm. and but I also like having these kind of exchanges. So, this was fantastic.
No, it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. When I was on your program a couple of years ago, it was right after my article, which it told people to calm down. Bolton, the Walrus, was talking China 14 times in his policy statement, Heritage Foundation, right. but you shouldn't pay attention to that. And guess what? You shouldn't, because nothing came of that. It never played out. And that's what I pretty much said. I said, but if they do something, there's a potential here. Of course, they never did anything, so nothing came of it. But that's when you had me on right after that. At the end of the program, you and Kobus, who is your co-host on there, Kobus von Staden, you guys said something, and I'm like, wait a second. That's not what I said. They mischaracterized or they misunderstood. I don't even remember what it was. But
it wasn't intentional, by the way. Not intentional.
I know it wasn't, but you guys were just trying to, coalesce and wrap up and for the audience what had gone on. And I'm like, no, I think they misunderstood my point, but I don't even remember what the point was. But so what I do on my program is I give all of my guests the last round fired. So I'm gonna give you a chance here to just share whatever thoughts you might want to talk about. If you want to promote the China Africa Project or the new name for it, or if you want to just say, there's hope or the world's falling apart, we have to wait for the Alpha Centurions, whatever you want to share here as kind of the last wrap up. And then what I'll do is I'll put you in the waiting room. And if you can hold on for just a minute or two while I wrap up the show so we can chat, and let me do that. So, okay, folks, Eric Olander.
Okay, last kind of, listen, the China story writ large is vastly more complicated and nuanced than you'll ever pick up from mainstream, or even if you're digging into it even a little bit, certainly on social media. It takes time. You can't simply come into this as an amateur. And that's why the work that we're doing, and there's a whole bunch of newsletters and there's great resources out there. I really, really hope that all of your listeners and followers and viewers are take the time, because again, like COVID, like climate change, China is a 21st century transformational phenomenon, and it's going to affect your children. It's going to affect the rest of our lives. And if you don't have a solid understanding of what they're doing, you're really, really at a disadvantage. So that's why I work 14 hours a day trying to contextualize this for US, European, and African audiences. That's who consumes our stuff. I hope you'll give us a try. Again, ChinaAfricaProject.com/subscribe. It's a labor of love. The subscriptions are cheap. They're $15 a month, $7 for students and teachers. We intentionally made it accessible because we didn't want to do one of these $5,000 a year things. We want normal people to be able to get this. And we want people in government offices to be able to get this. So $149 a year if you want it. Again, I love having these conversations, but it is the defining issue of our time in every sense. And I just hope that people will take the time to better understand it.
Well, Eric, thanks a lot. I really appreciate that. It's a brilliant way to wrap it up there. And yeah, I can attest, folks, it's a brilliant website. Whether you agree with the things they say or don't, it's worth reading to be informed. You know, there was a time, Eric, that I had 43 different magazine subscriptions. 43. Yeah. And people are like, how do you read all these things? Well, I don't sleep. That's how. No, but and when I was in Africa, it was a real pain because the diplomatic pouch was 3 weeks behind. So by the time I got my Economist, you know, it was 3 weeks old. But, but
luckily, technology solved that problem now for you.
Technology has solved that problem. But the other thing too is that many of these publications, I can't stomach to read them anymore because they're simply propaganda outlets across the world. They're dishonest in their news production. That is not what I see at the China Africa Project. I see an honest attempt.
I think you like what we do. Yeah, I think, and we make a good effort. And when we make a mistake,
you're honest about it. You admit it.
From time to time, I literally put it up right at the top. You know, I said that a former Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs was a lobbyist for the Somaliland government. It was then told to me that that is not the case, and they gave me the documents to prove it. And the next day, I just put it saying, by the way, it was informed to me that an expert explained to me why this is not the case. We apologize for the error. When you make a mistake, which it happens, you just come clean. The audience then respects you that much more for being transparent on those issues, and they really believe you when you're right then more, because and if they call you out, and we have a great audience that is constantly checking us and saying no. And I love that back and forth that we have. And so if you and others become part of our reader community, that's the kind of exchange that we love to have.
Absolutely. And then that's my point exactly. You know, but the problem for me, Eric, is that I do the same. You know, if I get something wrong, or if I get something from the media that's stated incorrectly and I find it to be factual, then I'll correct that. I'll point it. But I'm almost never wrong. So it's rare that I have to do that.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
No, but seriously, no, you're right. It does generate confidence and trust with your audience. And that's what the mainstream media has lost today. You can't trust them. They're dishonest about so many things. And I'm not going to pick individual outlets because it's most of them, whether it's on cable news or it's in print media. It's so disgusting and vile. But your China Africa Project has been forthright from my perspective. If I've missed that, then I've missed something. Forthright, honest. If you've gotten it wrong, you've been honest about it. And it's insightful. Here's the one last thing I'd like to mention before I get you off air is that you, because of your efforts, because of your context, because of your time on the ground, have built access and networks to people that most people never get a chance to talk to or hear from. And that, I think, is one of the most compelling reasons to take a look at the China and Africa Project site.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
No worries. All right, folks, Eric Olander, I'm going to put him in the waiting room, and then I'll wrap up, and Eric and I'll chat offline just a second. Thank you, Eric. All right, cool. Hang on, folks. Let me put him in the waiting room. I don't want to hang him up here. There we go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in this unusual time. I know it's early, and most people are actually who have jobs or at work right now in parts of Africa where most of my audience is at. I know people watch this after the fact, so thanks for those of you who tuned in. Thanks for the comments. My apologies for not getting in your comments today. You can see it was a very engaging conversation between Eric and I, so we didn't get to the comments like I normally do. Don't forget to tune back in 59 minutes for Answer the Question with Rob Hutchison and Chris Wyatt. Rob, of course, from Dear SA, the organization with over 1.1 million South Africans who are subscribing to their efforts to help civil society in South Africa. Rob Hutchison and Chris Wyatt for Answer the Question. We'll talk politics and issues, primarily South Africa, but also around the world in the next hour. Thanks a lot for tuning in, folks. We'll catch you here next time on Chris Wyatt Africa. Have a lovely day wherever you're at around the world, whether it's in Botswana, in South Africa, Ireland. Hey, Authentic Max, if you're still out there in Nepal, thanks for listening. And folks in New Zealand, Andre Jacobs in China, thank you for listening. And to my guests today, Eric, fantastic conversation. I really love that we didn't agree on everything, which is awesome. It's not just an echo chamber. It's good to see. And a brilliant guy, a great American who says it like he sees it. There you go, folks. Thanks a lot. Cheers, and we'll catch you here shortly on Chris Wyatt. Take care of yourself, folks, and be safe out there. See you in 1 hour.